When was the last time you felt truly alive? Not distracted, not entertained, not numbed for a moment by a glowing screen, but awake, present, filled with a kind of quiet electricity that reminded you what it means to be human. For most of us, it has been too long. We move through our days in fragments, 10 seconds here, 30 seconds there, a scroll, a click, a glance. We skim life instead of drinking it. Hours vanish and we can barely recall what we were doing. We live, but not deeply. The poet William Blake saw this danger more than 200 years ago. He warned against what he called single vision, the dull, mechanical way of seeing the world when you are cut off from imagination and intensity. A way of living that shrinks everything into gray outlines. To Blake, this was death in life, a narrowing of the soul. Does that sound familiar? Because our world today has perfected the art of single vision. Everything is quick, shallow, optimized for distraction. We live surrounded by endless movement, and yet it feels strangely empty. The tragedy is not that we don't have enough time. The tragedy is that we scatter our attention until the hours blur together and vanish. Think about your own days. How often do you sit down with one thing, a book, an idea, a project, and give yourself to it completely? No half attention, no secret urge to reach for your phone, no background noise stealing half your focus, just you, locked in. For most of us, this is rare, maybe non-existent, and yet, when it happens, when we do find that state, everything changes. Time bends, energy rises, and suddenly, life feels alive again. That state, this rare moment of immersion, is what I want to call locking in. It's not about pushing harder or forcing yourself to grind. It's not about stress or pressure or achievement. It's about falling so deeply into what you're doing that nothing else exists. Blake understood this. He once wrote that to see the world truly, you must learn to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower. That's not a poetic exaggeration. It's a description of total absorption, of being so present, so locked in, that even the smallest detail overflows with meaning. But here's the problem. We've forgotten how to live this way. We've let ourselves become fractured. We treat life like a blur of small entertainments, when deep down we know that only immersion makes us feel real. So if you've been drifting, if you've been scrolling and scattering and drifting some more, you are not alone. We all fall into it, but drifting has a cost. Every day spent half aware is a day we never get back. Every day lived in single vision dulls us a little more. The good news is that the way back is simple. Not easy, but simple. You don't need to change your entire life. You don't need to become someone else. You only need to reclaim that capacity to lock in, to give yourself fully to the moment, the task, the vision. Because when you do, you'll discover something shocking. The feeling of being alive was never gone. It was only buried under distraction. This is the beginning of the journey. In the parts that follow, we'll uncover what locking in really is, why it feels so rare today, and how you can return to it. For now, hold on to this. You are capable of more presence, more focus, and more intensity than you realize. And when you learn to lock in, you'll find that the world itself begins to open again. When people hear the phrase lock in, they often imagine force, discipline, grinding harder, chaining yourself to the desk until the work is done. But that's not what I mean. Locking in is not about tension. It's not about clenching your fists and pushing against resistance. it's the opposite. It's about absorption, about letting yourself dissolve into the moment so completely that there's nothing left outside it. Think of the last time you lost track of hours without even noticing. Maybe it was writing, painting, playing a game, tinkering with music, or simply walking outside. At some point, the noise of self-consciousness fell away. There was only the act, the flow, the unbroken thread of focus. That is locking in. William Blake captured this state in his own strange and luminous way. He saw the world not as fragments, but as infinite. To him, even the smallest thing shimmered with endless depth if you gave yourself to it fully. That famous line of his, "To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower," is not about fantasy. It's about perception sharpened by immersion. To Blake, the ordinary was never ordinary. It was alive with meaning, if only you locked in long enough to notice. Modern psychology calls this flow, but Blake's vision takes it further. Flow can sound clinical, like a brain state measured in charts and scans. For Blake, it was sacred. It was how human beings touched eternity in the midst of time. It was the doorway to what he called infinite worlds. This is why locking in matters. It's not just productivity. It's not a hack to get more done in less time. It's how you reconnect with life's depth. When you are locked in, the split between you and the world dissolves. You are no longer standing outside of life, analyzing it, waiting for meaning to appear. You are inside it, breathing it, shaping it. Look at an athlete in the zone. Every movement sharp, precise, inevitable. Look at a musician lost in improvisation, fingers moving as if by some hidden current. Look at a writer forgetting meals and hours, carried by a sentence. These are not moments of strain. They are moments of freedom, of union between the person and the act. And here's the strange paradox. Locking in doesn't drain you. It feeds you. Instead of exhaustion, you feel more alive when you emerge. Because for once, the energy that's usually spent juggling distractions, second-guessing, and half-commitments is finally concentrated. Finally whole. That is the joy we've been starving for without realizing it. That is what Blake insisted on. Vision, depth, the refusal to settle for a flattened world. To live fully, you must give yourself fully. So when I say lock in, I'm not telling you to grind harder or punish yourself with effort. I'm telling you to fall into life with both hands. To trust that immersion will give you back more than distraction ever could. Because here's the truth. Locking in is not reserved for geniuses, poets, or athletes. It's human. It's natural. You were born with the capacity for it. You've already touched it, even if only for a few fleeting moments. And you can return to it again and again if you're willing to step past the noise. In the next part, we'll explore why this state feels so rare today, and why the modern world seems designed to keep us drifting instead of locked in. But remember this for now. What Blake called vision is not far from you. It's here, waiting. All you need is the courage to sink into it. If locking in feels so natural, why does it seem almost impossible today? Why do most of us live in fragments instead of immersion? The answer is both ancient and modern. Blake, even in his own time, saw it happening. He lived through the dawn of the industrial age, when human beings were slowly reduced to cogs in a machine. He warned that the more we surrendered to single vision, the more we would lose the richness of imagination. To him, the factories and systems of his time were not just mechanical. They were spiritual prisons, dulling the human soul. Fast forward to our world, and the problem has multiplied. We no longer face just the clanging of machines. We face an endless flood of distractions designed to fragment us. Every buzz, every notification, every scroll is a tug away from depth. And here's the danger. Distraction doesn't just waste time. It rewires how we see. It trains us to live in surfaces, never in depth. It leaves us restless, uncomfortable in silence, always reaching for the next hit of novelty. Blake would call this a flattening of perception, the collapse of vision, a life lived at the shallow end. Think about it. When you sit with nothing but your own thoughts, how quickly do you reach for your phone? When you start a task that demands focus, how soon does your mind drift? We've become allergic to stillness, uneasy with the quiet, addicted to interruption. But underneath that habit is something deeper: fear. Fear of failure, fear of boredom, fear of discovering that if we give our whole selves to one thing, it might not be enough. It's safer to scatter, safer to skim, safer to never go all in. And so we float through our days in a haze of half-effort. We never taste the fullness of absorption, and so life begins to feel thin, even meaningless. Blake saw this in his own society. People reduced to function, robbed of imagination. He raged against it. His art and poetry were his rebellion, his way of insisting that life must be more than mechanical repetition. The tragedy is that our age has perfected what he feared. We carry factories in our pockets now. Distraction is portable, endless, invisible. And worse, it is rewarded. Be always available, always scrolling, always reacting. That's what our world demands. And yet, when we obey, we feel more lifeless than ever. Here's the irony. What we think of as freedom, the freedom to flit from one thing to another, is actually a new kind of slavery. To be free is not to scatter, but to immerse, to devote, to lock in. So don't blame yourself if you find focus hard. The world is designed to scatter you. It is designed to keep you in Blake's single vision, half awake, half alive. But also remember, you are not powerless. You still carry the same spark Blake spoke of, the same capacity to see a world in a grain of sand. It is only buried. And here lies the hope. Because what has been trained into you can be untrained. What has been dulled can be sharpened again. The fact that you miss immersion, the fact that you crave it, that is proof it is still alive in you. In the next part, we'll shift from the problem to the promise, the hidden joy of locking in. And you'll see why returning to this state isn't just about productivity or achievement. It's about remembering what it feels like to live with vision, not fragments. Up to this point, we've been talking about distraction as a problem, about drifting, about scattering. But let's turn the lens to the other side. Because the real secret of locking in is not just that it saves you from distraction, it gives you something infinitely greater. It gives you joy. Not the shallow joy of momentary entertainment, but the deep joy that comes when you lose yourself in something and suddenly feel more alive than you have in weeks. William Blake lived for this kind of vision. He believed that when you gave yourself fully to what was before you, the ordinary became radiant. To see clearly, to see deeply, was to unlock a hidden world inside the world. Think about the last time you were absorbed in something so deeply that you forgot the clock. Maybe you were writing, drawing, building, training, or even just having a conversation that mattered. When you finally came up for air, hours had passed, and instead of exhaustion, you felt strangely restored, almost like you had been given back to yourself. That is the hidden joy of locking in. It doesn't just produce results, it produces aliveness. Blake's line comes back here again. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wild flower. What is he really describing? The miracle of immersion. The way even a single detail becomes infinite when you look with your whole being. That is what happens when you lock in. The task in front of you, no matter how small, becomes a doorway into something vast. Modern life makes us believe joy comes from constant novelty. The next show, the next scroll, the next update. But joy is not in variety. Joy is in depth. Joy is when you stop skimming and dive. The paradox is that what feels like disappearing into the work is actually when you feel most alive. You lose yourself, but in losing yourself, you become more yourself than ever. The noise of comparison and judgment fades. The background static of life goes silent. There is only the doing, only the moment. And that, Blake would insist, is where the divine lives. Not in grand escapes or perfect moments, but in the ordinary illuminated by attention. To lock in is to discover the infinite hidden inside the finite. Think of a musician practicing scales. To most, it would look boring. But to the musician who locks in, each note becomes its own world. Think of a painter sketching a single line over and over until it comes alive. Think of a runner who falls into rhythm, breath, and stride blending into something like music. These moments are not dull repetition. They are portals. The modern mind struggles with this because it wants constant stimulation. But stimulation exhausts. Immersion restores. When you lock in, you leave the shallow stream of constant novelty and step into a river that runs deeper. That is why, when you emerge from hours of immersion, you often feel lighter, sharper, more alive. This is why locking in matters so much more than productivity. It's not about how much you get done. It's about how much you feel. Because what we're starved of is not entertainment or convenience. We're starved of depth. We're starved of the joy that comes only from devotion. Blake's vision wasn't reserved for poets. It was human. It was a reminder that you and I can find infinity in the smallest things, if only we dare to give them our full attention. In the next part, we'll move from joy to practice, how you can begin to reclaim this capacity. Not through hacks or harsh discipline, but through simple steps that open the door back into depth. By now, you know what locking in feels like. You've probably tasted it before, even if only for a few fleeting minutes. The question is, how do you return to it in a world built to scatter you? The answer is simpler than you think. It isn't about iron discipline or endless hacks. It's about creating the conditions where immersion can naturally take root. Blake would remind us that vision is not forced. It's allowed. You don't grab it with clenched fists. You open space for it, and it comes. So where do you start? First, make room. You cannot lock in while drowning in noise. Choose one thing and remove everything else that pulls you away. That may mean silencing your phone, shutting the door, or even stepping outside. Blake spoke of cleansing the doors of perception. That begins with clearing away distraction. Second, start small. You don't need hours at once. 10 minutes of full immersion can be more transformative than 3 hours of fractured attention. Begin with a small window of focus and let it expand naturally. It's better to lock in for 10 pure minutes than to drift for hours. Third, choose something that matters. You already know the activities that pull you in, the things that, when you give yourself to them, make the world fall away. Trust that instinct. It doesn't have to be grand or impressive. It might be music, writing, reading, sketching, training, or even cooking. What matters is that it carries you. Fourth, ritualize it. Blake's own practice was full of ritual, drawings, poems, engravings, each treated as a sacred act. You can do the same. Light a candle, put on a certain piece of music, sit at the same desk. These signals tell your mind. Now we enter depth. Fifth, release judgment. This is crucial. Many people avoid immersion because they fear what will come out. What if the writing is bad? What if the song doesn't sound right? What if the sketch is clumsy? Forget all of that. Locking in is not about results. It's about state. It's about giving yourself fully, without splitting your attention into critique. The quality will come later. Above all, remember, locking in is a gift, not a punishment. So often we approach focus as if it's some kind of burden, a grim duty. But when you've experienced it, you know the truth. Immersion is liberation. It lifts the weight of scattered thought. It restores you. It's not about producing something useful for the world. It's about reclaiming yourself. Blake's vision was not escape into fantasy. It was deeper reality. He believed imagination was the most truthful thing we had, because it let us see the infinite within the finite. In the same way, locking in is not withdrawal from life, but a fuller plunge into it. So when you set out to lock in, don't think of it as a chore. Think of it as an invitation. You are inviting yourself back into aliveness. You are choosing depth over drift. And here's the hopeful truth. The more often you do this, the easier it becomes. Attention is like a muscle. The first minutes may feel restless, even unbearable. But if you stay, if you breathe, if you let yourself sink in, suddenly it clicks. And when it clicks, you remember why it was worth it. In the final part, we'll step back and see the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about focus or productivity or even creativity. It's about transformation, about unlocking the hidden intensity that makes life itself feel alive again. So let's return to the question we began with. When was the last time you felt truly alive? Not just awake, not just entertained, but alive in that deep, electric sense. The truth is, those moments always come when you are locked in, when the noise falls away, and you give yourself fully to something that matters. This is the secret Blake spent his life proclaiming. That vision transforms everything. He wrote, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite." Locking in is how we cleanse those doors today. It is how we see again. Because here's the paradox. In locking in, you don't escape life. You discover it. You don't lose time. You gain it back, richer and fuller. You don't become less yourself. You become more yourself than ever. Think of the alternative. A life spent drifting, days vanishing into fragments, always reacting, never arriving. That is what Blake called single vision, a flattened, mechanical way of existing that strips life of wonder. You may survive this way, but you will never feel alive. Locking in is the opposite. It is not about grinding harder or proving yourself or achieving perfection. It is about presence. It is about choosing depth over drift, devotion over distraction. It is about remembering that joy is not in constant novelty, but in total immersion. and it is possible for you, right now. You don't need to wait until your life is perfectly arranged. You don't need to be a genius, a poet, or a saint. All you need is to choose one thing and give yourself to it, even for 10 minutes, even for one breath, because in that act of devotion, the infinite returns. Blake believed that to truly see was to see the divine in everything. A flower, a grain of sand, even the smallest detail became a world. That is the gift of locking in. It cleanses your perception until the ordinary reveals its hidden radiance. So ask yourself again, when was the last time you felt alive? And then ask, what would happen if you locked in today? Not tomorrow, not when everything feels easier, but now. You might be surprised. The heaviness you carry may begin to lift. The restlessness may quiet. The blur of the hours may suddenly sharpen into something clear, alive and real. Because here's the final truth. You are not broken. Your tension is not gone. Your ability to lock in has not disappeared. It has only been buried, under noise, under fear, under distraction. But it is waiting for you. It is yours. And when you reclaim it, you will discover what Blake knew. That life itself is infinite when you give yourself to it. That aliveness is not something you chase. It is something you uncover by going all in, so lock in. Lock in to your craft, your calling, your moment. Lock in to the world right in front of you. Because when you do, you will feel it. The pulse of being alive again. And that, more than anything, is what makes life worth living.